I enjoy the extraordinary honor of having been accused by the 2020 Nobel Prize winner in literature of being obsessed with death. It's true, I am. I'm obsessed with death and its precursor, aging. I'm 67 years old now, so I've begun the ramp down, and I've been fascinated by death since my parents died when I was about 32. They were both 59. They died within a couple of years of each other of different cancers. And I think my attention to death started with a time when I visited my parents. We were sitting in the kitchen and my dad was poring over poems from the Norton anthology and somehow knew all of these poems about death and read them out loud, many of which I have since memorized. I haven't experienced that much death directly. But I think about it a lot. And it relates to my other work, which is on the origins of life. One of the effects of having an explanation for what life is, as emergent within nothing but chemistry, is you get an explanation for death, what it really is, and how it works. That is, since I think of myself as a constraint that limits what physical chemistry does, I also know that when I die, that constraint will be gone, and I'll no longer exist any more than would, let's say, the constraints that make a bubble exist back in 1967 when you saw it, or if you're younger than that, 1990, whatever, some past constrained form. Also different in that, unlike a bubble, I will have left much more of an effect on the world. So I don't believe in reincarnation in any of its various imagined manifestations, not an afterlife here, there, or anywhere. But I do have a sense that my influence might stick around for a while, though not long, and certainly not attributable to me. I even wrote a limerick about it. I call it real incarnation. Reincarnation is real. Just how will reduce its appeal. It's your seeds and your deeds, not your soul. It recedes, hopping off after once round the wheel. So I am quite confident that I will no longer exist. And this poses a challenge for me that I came to understand better when I read Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death, an important book for me. It's a book that argues that we're all living with a paradox. We humans are living with a paradox. With language, we can imagine ideals. And we, as living organisms, we are striving for our own existence, for our own persistence. So here we are, humans, who can foresee our inevitable deaths and know it's coming and know we can't escape it. And therefore, despite our struggle for existence, we know from the get-go, once we were born, that we will fail at our fundamental, most essential goal, striving for our own persistence. I think that's the question behind all the spiritual answers, spiritual or scientific. It's how do you throw all into life knowing you'll be thrown out? How do you invest knowing that you'll have to divest? And I count three main responses to it. The first is you won't be thrown out. Your soul is eternal, and you can commit to something greater than you that will enable you to live forever. Christianity, any of the great religions, any of the major religions have an aspect of this about them. Your soul will live on forever. Buddhism, we debate whether it's a religion or not, but its response is different, which is given that we'll be thrown out, divest, divest, divest. Don't get attached to anything. Well, I am attached, and I don't see a way out of that. I'm attached to living. I'm attached to my struggle for persistence. So the third option, besides this one where you commit to what Becker called an immortality project, something that lives on beyond you and carries you through into the eternity, and an alternative also to the divest, divest, divest you'll get from Buddhism or nihilism or a variety of other arguments that would even go so far as to say, I'm not a self. I have to convince myself that I'm not a self. I don't buy that. But the alternative, the third that I subscribe to is, yeah, that's the question. How do you throw all in knowing you'll be thrown out? And we're thrown out daily. We suffer little setbacks that are enough to freak any of us out. These setbacks remind us that we will die, that we don't have full command, that we can't control everything for forever. Becker describes us at one point in his book, The Denial of Death, as gods with anuses, by which he means, with language, we are capable of imagining eternity, an ideal state. No more struggle for persistence, just a happily ever after, which is my definition of romance. It's the dream of happily ever after that lives in all of us. So that, in that respect, we are gods. But in another respect, we have anuses. That is, we are here on earth consuming energy, passing it through our bodies, through our constraints, that channel that energy into work that regenerates the constraints that we are. So that's how I think of myself. I'm a god with an anus. I'm grounded in reality, where the infinite is not possible, where there are no absolutes, and the romantic dream of happily ever after that lives in all of us is ultimately dashed. And I'm also perfectly capable of imagining the ideal. I even harbor the illusion that death is for losers, and I'm an exception. I know it's not true. But I still believe it. Now, as I get older, I face a problem faced by anyone who's getting older. It's kind of, is that all there is? By now, my story is mostly told. I know more or less who I turned out to be, what kind of person I ended up being. And a lot of things that used to give me great joy, romantic joy, the sense, however false, that I was a god, those things, I've become jaded on quite a few of them. Or at least I feel a tapering off of my enthusiasm. And not only that, the world loses interest in the aged. Interest always passes to the younger generations. I study my older friends, of which I have a great many. I look for positive and negative role models on how to grow old in ways that are graceful, that don't demand more attention than we deserve in our old age. I have friends who I would describe as still straining to get affirmation from the real world that is no longer available to us as we grow older, or is certainly not guaranteed to us the way it is to the dashing and young. And I have friends who are handling it with great grace. Lately, I've been asking my friends at 70 or around there whether they can imagine getting to a point where they don't have any projects. See, from my perspective, I've got to go from having an obsession with my projects, the things that affirm me, the things that give me joy. My obsession, my work, my commitment to those projects, my focus, I have to go from when I expect that joy to where I feel productive if I've had a good shit. That counts as a good day for a man in their 90, if they're lucky enough to get there, man or woman. So I've been asking them, could they get by without having a project? Do they foresee getting to that point? And most say, no, they're going to need a project to the very end. They are addicted to their projects. Their projects could be small, large, grand, not grand. They could be as little as knitting or trying to save the world, as big as trying to save the world. But they need that focus. They need that enthusiasm. The question then is, how do you maintain that enthusiasm? Having some kind of focus, something to work toward, even as the world's interest in us wanes. I have a few friends who say they're fine without having a project. And I have a few friends who feel a bit stranded because they had projects, but they were work-related, and now that they're retired, they're not sure if they can just relax into what Larkin calls days of thin, continuous dreaming, watching light move. That's Philip Larkin, the poet. Love that line. So they're trying to decide whether they need a project, and if they do need a project, they're starting from scratch. It's kind of difficult, especially as we get older. You can teach older dogs new tricks, but mostly it's not worth it. The learning curve is too great, and the benefits, the time in which they can use their new skills, is limited. So I have friends who need a project and have one. I have friends who don't need a project, and I have friends who need a project and don't quite know what it is yet. That last one's a hard one. I spent my first 40 years not sure what my project was. I'm glad I did that early, and I am so clinging to my projects. I am one of those people who can't imagine not having a project in my older years. I cling to it in part because I never want to get back to that place of disorientation, lacking a groove or feeling like my groove is a rut. I'm just that kind of person. I need a project. I'm very addicted to my projects. In fact, a lot of the rest of what life is about has fallen away because I am so enthusiastic/addicted to my projects. My two main projects are the kinds of things I put in these videos and playing music at night with friends, jazz and funk and that kind of stuff. But the world will lose interest in me, and my ideas will become past ideas, ideas that have been digested by society. I have friends, I would describe them as negative role models in this respect, who are still touting ideas that were, ideas whose time had come back in the 70s or 80s, whose time has now gone. I call it cliché Guevara. They are sharing as revolutionary ideas that by now are not revolutionary, they're cliché. So how do I deal with that? How does one deal with that? How does one deal with waning interest? My guess is that I have to keep my romantic flame alive, my dream, my godlike dream of happily ever after. I have to keep that alive, but I can't rely on it being sustained, supported, and affirmed by the world around me, because I will be suffering from cliché Guevara. I'll be a has-been. My capacity, my faculties will have declined. My looks will have declined. And in a way, the world shuns the old and disabled. We're all temporarily abled, and I will become disabled. And there's something about the aged and the disabled, unfortunately, unjustly, that humans are repelled by, just like we are repelled by any signs of decay. There's a name for it, actually. It's called seplophobia. And I think it's fundamental to us all. It's fundamental to this tension between us being gods on the one hand, but gods with anuses. That is, we don't want evidence of it. The best I can do, here I'm being callous but at least honest, is to take signs of age and decay as evidence that death is for losers and I'm an exception. Which I've just got to say, I know that's bullshit. But I still harbor that romantic assumption about myself. So what do you do when you're getting old? How do you grow old gracefully? One thing is you go through bouts of temporary depression, hopefully temporary. You just have to be sad for a while. You just have to be disappointed because part of you really expected that this was going to go on forever and that you were going to go from strength to strength. That it was forever going to be an uplifting curve, and that death is for losers and you're an exception. So you just have to go through these moments, mine are usually in the morning and late at night, when you recognize that it's not the case. You are going to die. You're beginning the process. This is the steep decline, and you're starting to feel it in your bones. So you just have to be sad for a while. And the sadness is how you settle your expectations. You accept that that's your inescapable fate, as it is for all organisms. You also meditate on death and time. I describe it as being both chronophobic and chronophilic. That is, I love time. Time astonishes me. I'm amazed by it. I delight in it. And it terrifies me. I'm chronophobic. So you live with that tension, you lower your expectations gradually, you just have to be sad for a minute. And then it's almost like the tectonic plates that you're standing on settle, terrifying at first as they begin to settle, and then they settle. But that wouldn't be enough to sustain me. I'm not arguing for the acceptance of death. I get it. Rage against the dying of the light. I feel it. But I am arguing that that is part of the solution, is you gradually adjust your expectations to your reality, which in a way is the lifelong project anyway. In fact, that is my third alternative to the Buddhist approach, divest, 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 or you could say the religious approach, which is to find the one eternal truth, your immortality project. My alternative, my third alternative to that, is to say, no, that is the question. How to throw all in knowing that you'll be thrown out? How do you invest knowing you'll have to divest? And for that, the whole of reality, all of my experience becomes sacred text. That is, all my setbacks, all my uplifts, all the roller coaster ride of life, where the falls aren't exciting, they're terrifying. Those are the curriculum here. Not that anyone's sending me that curriculum, but that's, the Tao says the master makes use of all circumstances. I don't think that quite nails it. The master tries to make use of all circumstances, and my solution is to harvest those circumstances for further evidence about what life is. My project, regardless of whether it's an immortality project, is to use my time here as best I can to take as careful notes as I can on what the hell this all is. The whole ball of wax and us in it and me in it. That's my main project. Music's a sideline for me. I just do that for fun, for a kind of sensual pleasure, and for the opportunity to get better and better even as I age. I'm glad I picked out a hobby that has legs like that you can do till late in life. If I was a boxer, it would get harder at 80 or 90 to keep that joy alive. But music you can do for a long time, if you're lucky. So mine is this project where I try to take careful notes and I use my life experiences to understand, to get deeper into the curriculum and not try to escape it through divestiture or through investing in the one grand idea that will make me live forever. But even that's not enough. Beyond that, I do need my projects. And for that, I need to lower my expectations over time to where I'm comfortable doing them as my back 40, regardless of whether anyone else pays attention to it. So here I am on YouTube trying to keep up with the latest technology and ways of putting things out in the world, excited and thrilled by the opportunity to be able to spread my self-expression anywhere around the world in minutes. But I don't bet that I'll be able to sustain that to the very end. And I also know that it's limited. The world is getting crowded with people who also experience the same low barriers to entry. Anybody can make a YouTube video. So the good news is that I can get my word out. The disappointing news is so can everybody else. That's true for all of us, regardless of age. So my back 40, my aim for as I grow older, is to continue to have these enthusiasms for my projects, regardless of whether there's attention for them. And that's difficult. I'm a needy guy. I've relied on other people's affirmation all life long. And they describe some people as inner-directed and some people as other-directed. Other-directed means that they're guided by cues from others. And I don't want to be that kind of public influencer, and lucky me, I don't have to be. I spend long periods of time, long stretches, just doing my thing regardless of whether anyone's watching. And I also unencumbered my life about 10 years ago. I don't have a partner. I don't have a pet. I have friends, a distributed network of friends who come and go. I don't even have a houseplant. I like my life this unencumbered. I love to spend long periods of time alone and just working, taking careful notes as I can on what this all is, correcting my notes, curating them, dropping assumptions, changing my mind, learning new things, absorbing it. To me, that turned out to be the affirmation I needed. Now, it's not the case for everyone. My life was lucky this way, if you think that this is lucky. Some people would think that this is an extremely neurotic life and that I think way too much. But I enjoy this life, and in that respect, I'm lucky. And if one doesn't enjoy this life, then the question is, what will be your project that will see you through to the end, maintain your mojo, give you the affirmation you need without it relying on minds that are turned away, turned elsewhere, turned towards younger people, turned towards newer ideas than anything I have to offer. I think that I have to live out my romantic inclinations in fictions more than in reality. I've noticed this trend in me over the years. I used to date as though I could make eternity possible in the real world. In fact, when I read Becker's book and thought about my own immortality campaigns, I've been an atheist most of my life, pretty much all my life. I wondered, okay, so where is my immortality project? And I realized, this was maybe 20 years ago, that I was living it out in sex, love, dating, romance. That is, when I fell in love, I felt like I was being granted eternal life. And when the love ended, it felt like I was being doomed to hell. So that's where I think I played it out. And ever since about 10 years ago, I've moved away from that. I don't trust sex, love, dating, for me, as a place to play out my romantic drives. I play them out in fiction, all sorts of fictions, some of them quite nostalgic for the times. That is, they're evocative of times when I had greater enthusiasm. To give you an example, I watch a fair amount of TV, and when I'm watching TV, I imagine that I'm this youthful hero and that I would bravely make the choices they made, even though they're not making them, they're actors, and I am not at all sure I would make them. I haven't been tested at the kinds of things that get portrayed in drama, but I do enjoy that fiction. I get to feel like it's real while I'm watching it. That's where I want to exercise my romantic inclinations, in the comfort, safety, and privacy of my own home. Speaking of which, I'll bring up another one that's a touchy subject, but I actually think it deserves more respect than it gets. Masturbation. I joke, though it's true, that I'm no longer masturbating from my own drives, from real-time drives. I'm doing it nostalgically. I'm enjoying imagining that I still cared about that stuff as much as I once did. I think by my age and with my frequency, it's worse than that. I'm nostalgic for when I was nostalgic, for when I had that drive. It was glorious. I'm glad I had my day in the sun. And there's a lot to be said for that attitude. I see two ways to think about our past. One is that it's a substitute for future happiness. I had my day in the sun. I got mine. It's one of the lucky things about being older is that they can't take away from you the experience you had. Sure, I would like life to go on forever as happy as I am, but that's the ideal. That's what gods can imagine, and I'm not a god. By living standards, I've had a lucky life, and I've gotten to enjoy a lot. I've gotten to take a ride on many of life's amusement park rides, and they can't take that away from me. Younger folks are still trying to get theirs. It's not a guarantee for them, but for me, it's tucked to bed. I had mine. The alternative would be to assume that I should be maintained to the manner in which I'm accustomed. I don't think that's in the cards, but imagining that I am through fiction, through masturbation, things like that, feels like a safe form of escapism, a safe venting of my God-like qualities. That is, the capacity to imagine the infinite. It feels like a safe place to do that. Optimal illusion, kidding myself in ways that help more than harm, and not imposing it on the world. So I am suggesting that as we grow older, in addition to allowing those tectonic plates to settle, being sad for a minute, and then adjusting, and then being sad again for a minute, and then adjusting, which feels like part of the curriculum to me. It's this third alternative where everything is sacred text to me. In addition to that, having a project, if you are that kind of person, and having it be a project you can do regardless of the affirmation, or at least settling for less and less affirmation as you get older. That seems like a reasonable plan. And I'll mention one other factor. It doesn't end well. life doesn't end well. Even for the most glorious people, and I've known some pretty glorious people who did go from strength to strength, the end is not pretty. It's not pretty for the same reasons that age is not pretty to the young. That is, we are averse to seeing decline, in particular our own. So that's part of the curriculum. That's just central to the curriculum. We are creatures that struggle for our own existence, that do work all day long. Biological work, emotional work, psychological work, conceptual work, to try to sustain ourselves, to maintain buoyancy, and then some, to try to feel really good about ourselves, to feel meaningful in the world. And we're going to lose, and it's not going to end well. I find that tragic, comic, a paradox, a reason to be obsessed with death, not so obsessed that I don't end up enjoying what I've got within that paradox. So for that, I really do need to have projects, however fictional. I have to some extent, be a legend in my own mind without it going to my head. That's what my positive role models for aging do. They accept their decline, they handle it ironically, they don't impose their rage against the dying of the light on other people. They make themselves tolerable company, and then in the privacy of their own homes, through projects that are even to some extent fictional because there's not much of an audience, through delusions of grandeur exercised in the safety and comfort of one's own private home, they get to exercise their egos, and I mean that in a positive sense. I mean the ego as the self we all are, trying to stay alive, trying to navigate the world. So they use their past experience as a substitute for future joys. They don't demand to be maintained in the manner to which they're accustomed. And in the comfort and safety of their own homes, they do play out as fiction the false belief that they are being maintained in the manner to which they are accustomed, and they don't let it go to their heads. That's my guess about how to handle it. Some would say I'm young, others would say I'm old. Some would say I'm naive about what it's like to grow old. But that's my best guess at 67.